Difficult question, and it's a question that's well known. It's recorded that at one point in the oppression, which was the Persians and that led into the Greeks, that period like 52 years, at one point in that oppression, there was a focus specifically on prohibiting Shabbos, Mila, circumcision, and sanctifying the new moon. Now, if you're going after the Jewish religion, you're trying to destroy it, as we are told, that's what the Greeks wanted to do. Shabbos is very, very central. It's every week in it. It's a fundamental understanding of how the world works. That's certainly a good target to go after. And bris Mila, since it's a mark in the flesh of men, which set them apart from other people, it's also a very plausible thing to go after, to try to reduce the differences between the Jewish population and the non-Jewish population. But sanctifying the new moon, I mean, that certainly doesn't look like it's on the top of the list or near the top of the list. If we were to choose a third, we'd maybe go after kashrus, because that's something that separates Jews from non-Jews because they can't eat the same foods. Or we would outlaw the literature, the books that we have. Why go after the new moon? And since this is Greek oppression, there has to be an idea behind it. Now, these selections weren't arbitrary. They were made with a certain amount of understanding, even though with their wisdom, their fundamentals led them desperately astray, but that doesn't mean they were just totally incompetent. It meant that there was a flaw at the center. So there are descriptions of the preference for these three. I'm going to give you one approach to the question. As always, I'm not saying it's the only way or the best way. It's the way that interests me because of my background and my training. And it does communicate some things that I think are very important. The official Greek philosophy of the world is that there's something called nature. Nature has rules in it, and those rules are necessarily true. They're not an accident, and they can't be violated. They can't be changed in any way. They're necessarily true, a little bit like the way naive people think of the laws of nature, like the law of gravity. So that if you release a stone that's unsupported, it's going to fall because it has to fall, because gravity pulls it down and makes it fall. The idea of laws as being general pictures which are always correct, always exact, and can't be avoided. And that includes the existence of the world also. The very existence of the world is a necessary fact, from which it follows immediately that there was no beginning. The world has always been, and the world always will be. Which means there's no creation. And since there's no creation, there's no creator. And even the gods, little g, that they believed in and worshipped in one sense or another, were parts of nature. They were not above nature, they were pieces of nature. There's a god of the sun, a god of the moon, and a god of the sea, a god of the winds, a god of fertility, a god of death. These are all parts of nature. So even what the gods do is necessary, unchangeable, uncontrollable. They have no choice about what they do. Nothing in nature could be changed in any way whatsoever. That was their fundamental philosophy of the world. Now, here you have the Jewish religion, which definitely doesn't believe that. The very fact that we believe in a creator means that nature didn't have to be. It was a free creation, which was a decision on the part of the creator. So there's an absolute incompatibility between the two of them. Now, if they're looking at Judaism as a culture with beliefs and values and priorities and particular behaviors and social organization, they want to destroy it. They're looking for the points of vulnerability for this particular fundamental difference. Other elements of Judaism which could be reconciled with nature, they're not interested in, because those don't have to be outlawed. Those don't have to be forbidden. They can simply be transformed. They can be recreated. So, for example, let's take Pesach. Pesach celebrates our liberation from slavery and oppression. Any nation could celebrate that. Any nation that believes in nature and only nature could celebrate that. It's terrible to be enslaved and it's wonderful to be free. Why wouldn't you have a Liberation Day celebration? Nothing in celebrating freedom means that you take a stand against nature. Shavuos, Matan Torah. All the nations had creatures that they worship, and those creatures expressed their will to them, and they took that will very seriously because those creatures were very powerful. And so a law-giving from those superior creatures is something which could be incorporated into any religion, even one that doesn't oppose the idea of nature. Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, you're being judged by those higher powers, and those higher powers will decide how to use their power to interact with you. The Greeks had such ideas also. There were the gods, and the gods had various powers, and they could determine victory or defeat in war or health and sickness. So it was very important to pay attention. Being cared for in the desert and being provided for in the desert. The gods had powers over rain. They had powers over the growth of vegetation. They had various powers of the way the world works, which were part of the natural functioning of the world. And you could celebrate the fact that the gods favor you and give you a good place in this natural world. Nothing in the other holidays of Judaism forces you to acknowledge that nature isn't the whole story. When you take a look at Shabbos, Shabbos is obvious. Shabbos celebrates the creation of the world. If there's a creation of the world, then the Greek story is simply a non-starter. So they can't allow that. There's no way to fill Shabbos together with a new inner reality which is consistent with nature, because its very essence, its very definition is to celebrate something that's unnatural. And the same is true with respect to Bris Mila. Their idea was the human body, which is produced by nature, is perfect because what nature does is what has to be. So to perform Bris Mila, which means to injure the body by slicing off part of it, is as if to say, I can't accept what nature provides. We have something that's better than nature, something that transcends nature, and that we're accomplishing that by slicing off a piece of the body. To them, that was unthinkable. It was absolutely unthinkable. So much so that in the Greek athletic contests, which were performed naked, and there were Jews who became Hellenized and who participated in Greek activities, if they wanted to participate in the athletic contests, and if they had a bris milah when they were a baby because they strayed from the beliefs and practices of their parents, they couldn't participate if it was visible on them that they had a bris milah. So there was a procedure whereby you could, I don't know what exactly they did, but make the organ look as if it had not had a bris milah so they could participate in the games. So the opposition of the Greeks to these two, to Shabbos and bris milah, I think we can understand quite easily, given their commitment to the idea of nature. But what's the idea with sanctifying the new moon? Why would that be something which they would oppose on the grounds that it contradicts the idea of nature? The answer is in a particular halacha, particular law of sanctifying the new moon, which is found in the Mishnah. It's not something that's esoteric. If you look at the institution superficially, you think it works like this. Well, the months are determined by the moon. Now, you know the moon's almost 30-day cycle is such that it passes by the sun. It's visible. It's visible when it's away. When it's not in the same line as the sun. When it comes to the same line as the sun, then its dark face is entirely facing us, so we don't see it. The light of the sun is shining away from us. And then, as it passes by, and a little sliver catches a little bit of light of the sun, it becomes visible again. So the new moon was declared, again, this is superficial, as I'll explain in a moment, but this is the appearance you get. The new moon was declared when the new moon was sighted. The new month was declared when the new moon was sighted. And there was a whole institution that witnesses from anywhere, if they saw it, and of course, some places would be cloudy, so you wouldn't see it. And you would only see it for a very few number of minutes. After the sun goes down, it would become visible, and then it too would go down. So then you'd have only a tiny portion of time where it could be visible. People would come to Jerusalem and come to the court, and they would report what they saw. And the court had astronomical knowledge to know that where it should be in the sky and what the shape should be, and which way the shape is a crescent, which way the shape is facing. So they would quiz them and show them diagrams, and if their reports were accurate, then they would say, okay, so today, that is to say, the day which started with the sighting of the new moon, that day is the beginning of the new month. And if it didn't show, then it would be the next day. So then you say, well, okay, so it's the appearance of the moon that determines the starting of the month. That sounds pretty natural. It does, except for one little detail, that the court has the authority to ignore the moon. The court has the authority, after the witnesses come, and they give their testimony, and it's verified that their testimony is correct, to say, thank you very much. We very much appreciate your effort to come and tell us. We're having a banquet in your honor, but we're waiting till tomorrow to start the month. We're just not starting it today. They can do that at their own will. Or vice versa. Could be that no one shows up, and they say, well, we want today to be the first of the month. So we're making today the first of the month. The Atem Afilu Mezidim means even if they consciously and deliberately start the month against the moon, it started when they say so. So now, let's think about a holiday, Pesach. Pesach comes out on the 15th day of the Hebrew month. There's one 24-hour period, all of a whole year, which has the sanctity of the first day of Pesach. How is it determined which 24 hours it shall be? Well, it's the 15th of the month, so it's determined by starting the month. The month is started when the court decides that it shall be started. Well, let's imagine you have a situation where the moon is sighted, but they decide that they want to make it the next day. So how will people take that? Well, I guess it isn't the moon that determines the month. If you think the month is a lunar phenomenon, then you're making a mistake. The lunar phenomenon, when the moon comes around, is a piece of nature. But the rabbis have an authority to sanctify time against what nature says. Well, that's something which a Greek cannot abide. He cannot abide that. And that being the case, they have to oppose that as well. Yeah.
So when, going back to the times you're talking about, there were times where the lunar month, so to speak, started when the moon, whatever, but the rabbis literally would be able to be like, no, we're not doing it today, we're going to do it tomorrow or yesterday or whatever it ended up being, depending on, was it to set up the holidays? Was it for...
Okay, so there are various reasons why they did that. And they are built into the fixed calendar that we have now. For example, there's the expression that you find in the writings, Lo Adu Rosh. Rosh Hashanah can't come on Aleph, Dalet, Vav. That means it can't be the first day of the week, can't be the fourth day of the week, and it can't be the sixth day of the week. Lo Adu Rosh. Okay. Yeah. Now, why is that? Well, for one thing, you don't want Yom Kippur to come out on Friday or Sunday, because if you did, then you would have 48 hours in which you couldn't bury a dead person. and leaving a body for 48 hours can be a disaster for that body. So you want to prevent Rosh Hashanah coming out in such a way that Yom Kippur will be Friday or Sunday. You do that by making sure that it doesn't come out on Wednesday or Friday. And then there's another thing. The last day of Sukkot is Hoshana Rabbah, and Hoshana Rabbah there's a custom which goes back to the prophets of taking large willow branches and doing a ceremony around the altar, and you couldn't do that if it was Shabbos. So they don't want Hoshana Rabbah to come out on Shabbos, and that's what you guarantee by making sure that Rosh Hashanah is not on Sunday. So in the times when they declared the month by the basis of the decision of the court, if the witnesses came on Sunday to say that we saw the new moon and today should be Rosh Hashanah, then they would say, thanks for coming, it's very nice to see you, but we're starting tomorrow, because we're not going to start on Rosh Hashanah. Yeah.
Making all these questions because it's such a big thing about thousands of years in advance.
So it's very interesting that they set up a basic calendar, and they took these things into account. Yes, Rosh Hashanah never comes out, and there are other things to take into account as well. And although I'm not an expert on it, it's if you're mathematically inclined to read up on the calendar, our calendar is phenomenally accurate. The Roman calendar, which was in use for the rest of the world, the rest of the Western world, in the 18th century, the calendar had come out of sync with the sun to the extent that they had to, I think it was like 11 days or 14 days, that they had to subtract from the calendar in order to catch up. And then they changed, instead of being 365 days, it became 365 and a quarter days. So you have the leap year every 4 years. You had it in February 29th, so as to make up for that, but they didn't have that. And there's a section of time which doesn't exist. There are dates that don't exist because they had to adjust it. Okay, so that was a calendar that they had for 1,500 years, 1,600 years, and it got really out of whack. And our calendar has been going on for much longer. And although there is a small discrepancy of something like 18 hours, I think. It doesn't affect the considerations of the calendar that we need, and so our calendar still is practically functional over that period of time. So there is something to be cognizant of, that we had something very, very solid and positive about that. So that was the position of the Greeks. Now, what's the truth? I mentioned this the other day, but I want to now stress it in philosophical terms. What's the truth? Well, you could think their position is everything is nature, and our position is not everything is nature. Nature is what it is, but there are other things besides nature. In particular, there's a creator, and number one, he created nature in the first place, and he has absolute power over nature, and that means he could intervene in nature whenever he wants. And that would allow miracles which violate the laws of nature, which the Greek picture forbids. There can't be any events that violate the laws of nature. That's going to be a gigantic difference. Comes out that according to the Greek picture, much of our literature can't be true, because much of our literature describes miracles. Really vast miracles, like a sea splitting aside and allowing passage on dry land, or all of the plagues in Egypt, or the description of the revelation at Sinai. All of that is description of events which violate the laws of nature. And from the Greek point of view, it's impossible to allow that those statements are true. And I will just make a footnote for those who happen to know something about this. In part 2, chapter 25 of the Guide of the Perplexed, Maimonides says explicitly, word for word, and I know I'm contradicting a lot of sources, it's just they're wrong, that nothing could be done to reconcile the Jewish picture with Aristotle. Nothing could be done. And no, at the end of the chapter, he doesn't say it could be done. He only says it could be done to reconcile the Jewish picture with Plato, but not with Aristotle. Aristotle is absolutely impossible because he denies miracles. And you cannot deny miracles and make Judaism work. So that would be one type of picture. If you need that in detail, on my blog, I wrote a whole article on it in great detail. I'm not the only one now. There's a lot of literature coming out on the Guide of the Perplexed, which to me is very nice to see. And a few of the commentators I saw also got this right. Even though Friedlander, in his introduction, his translation, gets this wrong, shockingly to me. But he got it wrong as well. At any rate, so that's one picture you could have. For the Greeks, everything is nature, and for us, there's nature, but there's plus, and the other things are in some ways stronger than nature, maybe more important than nature. That's one possible picture, sort of philosophically. But I think it's the unanimity of sources, maybe there's some sources I don't know, that picture is entirely wrong. There's no such thing as nature. There's no such thing as a nature that carries itself, that operates on its own, that's autonomous, that has its own independent being. There's no such thing. Maimonides, as a philosopher, says in the beginning of the Mishnah Torah and many other places that there's continuous divine creativity. We say it every morning in the prayers. Mechadesh, Tomid, Ma'aseh Bereishis. He makes anew the work of creation, and that's going on continuously. And were it to cease for an instant, everything would cease to exist. Only because he's providing that shefa, that divine energy, does the world continue to exist. So it's not as if there's nature and then sometimes God intervenes. You can't intervene in what you're doing. You can only intervene in something else. And since he's doing it all, he can't. It's not a question of intervention. It's the wrong description. And the Kabbalists even agree 100% that there is no, so to speak, inertia in existence. A thing doesn't exist today because it existed yesterday and nothing destroyed it. No, it exists only because at the present time, God is making it exist. So that being the case, it comes out that nature is nothing. Or you can redefine the word, if you want to use the word, like the Chazon Ish does. He says you can use the word nature for that which God does, which is constant and repetitive, fitting into categories. Yes, when you put the raw egg into the boiling water, 6 minutes later, it'll be hard. The proteins will coagulate and it'll be hard. That's because that's the way God runs the world. Almost all the time, that regularity is respected. Not because it happened by itself. Not because it's something called nature that made it happen. It's only because that's what he did over and over and over again. What we call miracles are where God's managing the world, gives rise to an event, which doesn't fit the natural categories. Big bodies of water don't spontaneously split, not even when the wind blows do they split down to the bottom and people go across on dry land. It doesn't happen. It happened once in history. It didn't happen any other time. But it isn't as if the boiling of the egg is any different in its causation. The eggs being caused to boil and the sea being caused to split are both divine activities. They're both divine actions. Just that one is more repetitive and constant, and the other is more unique. So from our point of view, we oppose the Greeks in the most absolute possible fashion. That which they say is everything, we say is nothing. And therefore there is absolutely no compromise possible between us and the Greeks. It's an absolute gulf. So, and they perceived that. And by the way, this was a historical progression. When there was a fight over the high priesthood, and one chased the other one out of the land of Israel, he ran to Sparta, one of the great Greek cities, and took refuge there. And they honored him because they did understand that in the Jewish culture, the rulers are the scholars. And that was also a Greek idea, that scholarship should be not your prowess in war, and not how much money you have, and not the great speeches you could make, but real wisdom. So they thought, the Jews have a very important value in common with us, and they honored him for that. That's before they got to know Jews even better. But then when they came to understand our anti-natural position, then it became, at that point, impossible to accept. And it was the they outlawed these three as the symbols of Judaism, which couldn't be reinterpreted in natural terms. Now, the picture that I'm describing is one where you have two real levels of existence. There's the superficial level, where you see how things behave, and then there's the meaning behind what makes it behave. And the Greeks also saw the two levels, and they said, something which superficially, maybe you think of it in terms of your philosophy, but we could replace that with a naturalistic philosophy. We are not going to take the energy to oppose them. We will replace them over time. We'll replace the inner. Think of Reform Judaism, where, it's humanistic monotheism, but none of the rituals that we have any real relationship whatsoever. At best, they have psychological training built into them or express ideas, but they're given humanistic meanings, humanistic purposes, and the superficial form is still in place, and the fundamental philosophy behind it has been replaced. That's much easier than outlawing everything. You won't excite so much open opposition as you would if you simply said you can't do anything Jewish. And that was the split strategy, to take the things that can be reinterpreted and gradually over time to reinterpret them. And the things that can't be reinterpreted, those things have to be opposed. Yeah.
Like Reconstructionists, that's basically what they've just built it up.
100%. Mordechai Kaplan named, and he was honest, he named his program Reconstructionism, meaning you have to reconstruct Judaism. And that meant to reconstruct it, to make it consistent with contemporary philosophy and contemporary science in that order. One could question the order, whether philosophy really deserves more credibility than science. That could be questioned. And his attitude was, modern philosophy and modern science are much more profound and much more real than Judaism, and therefore whatever of Judaism could be remain and reconstructed to be consistent with philosophy and science, that's worth having, and the rest of it isn't worth having. Right? And Reform Judaism says the same thing. By the way, conservative Judaism, when I first heard that term, I thought, wait a minute, but they're changing all sorts of things. That's true. The term conservative came into existence as opposition to reform. We're conserving more than reform conserves. But it didn't mean we're conserving the whole thing. Of course not. They're making their own changes as well. So this was the Greek strategy, and as I said, there's no hope for reconciliation. Now, one question that arises in this whole picture is, why was there a war? The oppression, it started with the Persians and it ran into the Greeks, and the period was 52 years. So the oppression was long, and at a certain point in time, they fought. Were they required to fight legally? Did Jewish law require fighting under those conditions? I'm told by those who know the subject better than I do, they're somewhat controversial, but it's very difficult to say that they were required to make a national uprising. Many went into hiding so that they could keep their Jewish practices without being caught. And there are some mitzvahs for which, if you're threatened with death, you have to die. Or if it's a time when they want to destroy the whole religion, then you would have to die. The question is how many were being caught? And how many could get away with it? How many could pretend? So the question is, what particularly triggered the war? And for a large-scale human reaction, there are two types of triggers. They might both be true. One is some external trigger, something changed in the way the oppression was being managed, or something internal about their attitudes came to the fore and led to the rebellion. There is one element which I know is part of the story. I'm sure there are other parts as well, but there's an element that's worthwhile meditating on for a little bit. And this, I heard one of my grandsons made a siyum of Baba Basra last week, and my son who spoke, I was in his house, my son who spoke provided me with the following idea, which I think is a very important idea. Yosef was sent by his father to check how his brothers are doing. His brothers are in Shechem with the flocks. Go and check how they're doing. Yosef arrives in Shechem. They're not there. He finds somebody, and he says, the fellow says, turns out it was an angel, but he says, what are you looking for? He says, I'm looking for my brothers. Oh, they've gone on from here. How are they? They're fine. They're okay. They've gone on from where do they go? To a place called Dosan. So Yosef goes to Dosan to check on them. Now, actually, there were two paths in front of Joseph. His father sent him to Shechem. Go to Shechem and see your brothers. Well, he went to Shechem. He has a witness who tells him that they're fine. Must he go to Dosan to see them with his eyeballs? Or not? Plausible he could come home to his father and say, you wanted me to check? They're doing fine. I know because someone told me. And you sent me to Shechem. I went to Shechem. They just didn't happen to be there. But that's where you sent me. That's what I did. No. He goes to Dosan. Goes to Dosan so he can see them and bring back a report. And that's where he gets caught, and that's where they sell him. What characteristic does that express? It expresses a characteristic of responsibility. If there's something that's in my path, I deal with it in the most responsible way possible, to do it in the most perfect way possible, because that's how I do things. Not because I'll get a reputation, or not because it'll be safer, or something. It's not external. It's not the external consequences that's it counts. It's his character. I do things with my responsibility. I'm on the line. I'm on the line. It's my responsibility. So what happens? He gets sold into slavery, into the house of Potiphar, who was some kind of official in the services of Pharaoh. And after a while, Potiphar puts Joseph in charge of the whole of his possessions. How did that happen? It's a new slave, a foreign slave, and somehow Potiphar says, with you, everything will be good. Well, first of all, God gave blessing to the things that he did, but he saw in him this character of responsibility. This is a person who puts himself on the line. He's not doing what he's doing because he's a slave and he can't help it and looking for a chance to escape if he can. No. He's taking responsibility for the management of the household. So he gets put in charge of the household. And the same thing is true in jail. He's put in jail. He's a criminal. And he's put in jail. Yeah, but the head of the jail says, this guy knows what he's doing. And this guy can be relied upon. He's genuine because he does things in a genuine way. Because he takes responsibility for how the things under his control are managed and what the outcome will be. So he becomes in charge of the whole jail. Then, the same thing is true with the whole kingdom. Pharaoh has a dream, and he can't get an interpretation of it. And those who were with Joseph in jail say, oh, we know this fellow, he's good at interpreting dreams. Well, the good interpreting dreams doesn't mean you could do Freudian analysis. As is specified in the story, and as he says to Pharaoh, he interpreted the dreams, and what he interpreted actually took place. We're not interested in getting insights into the dreamer's character. What we're interested in is knowing where to put our money in the economy, or knowing how to win the battle with the next enemy. So they bring him out, and Pharaoh presents the dream, and Joseph not only interprets the dream's predictive content, but he gives him advice as to how to run the kingdom in the meantime. And the Ramban asks, who's he to give advice to the emperor? Excuse me, you were asked to give an interpretation of the dream, so after that you give advice? Isn't that a chutzpah? Okay, Jews have chutzpah. No.
Who asked Ramban?
Ramban, Nachmanides. And he says, if you look carefully at the dream, you'll see that the advice that Joseph gave as to how to run the kingdom is part of interpreting the dream. Why? Because in the dream, and as Yosef says 3 times, it's one dream, not 2 dreams, just a repetition. You have the good elements, and then you have the bad elements, and then the bad elements devour the good elements. So if you're going to say your dream means there are going to be 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine, you've left out the part of the bad elements devouring the good elements. What about that? What is that teaching you? So he says, I know it's teaching. It's teaching you that the way you survive in the bad years by eating up the produce of the good years that he gets on his own. And when Pharaoh says, when he tells it to Joseph, I saw the bad cows eat the good cows, and you couldn't tell that the bad cows that devoured the good cows because they were just as thin and gaunt as they were before they ate them. So what does Joseph say? Joseph says, when you stock up all the extra food from the 7 good years and you eat it in the 7 bad years, the land will not be destroyed. Because that's what it says in the dream. It doesn't say you'll be fat and plentiful. No, you just won't be destroyed. And you'll survive. And all I'm promising is survival. So that was all part of the interpretation of the dream. But what does the dream do? The dream shows that Joseph is something very special. After all, Pharaoh consulted with all of his wise men and all of his magicians. Egypt was one of the world's centers for sorcery, for magic, for esoteric wisdom. And this slave from the north, from Canaan, comes in and says something which all the ones in the Egyptian service don't get. That's really astonishing. And by the way, I will now put in a footnote because this is important for understanding the text. There's a logical problem here, which is a problem which arose in philosophy in the 20th century also. Let's see. Pharaoh has a dream, and he doesn't know what it means. Doesn't know what it means. So he goes to the dream interpreters. Now, the way it usually works is this. If I have a dream, I don't know what it means. I go to them, they tell me what it means, and I say, these are the people who interpret dreams. So they have the authority, they have the experience, they have the wisdom, and they tell me what it means, and now I know what it means. That's the normal procedure. But that's not what happened. What happened was Pharaoh tells them, and they give the interpretation, he says, you're wrong. Really? They're wrong? How do you know they're wrong if you don't know the right interpretation? What do you mean they're wrong? And then Joseph comes along, gives his interpretation, that's it. He got it right. How do you know that his is right if you don't know what it means? There's a problem here. Hey, just in the logic of the scenario. And the answer is this. He doesn't know what it means, but he does know one fact. He knows one fact about the dream, and it's in the text. It's explicitly in the text. The text says, Pharaoh slept and he dreamt. Verb, he dreamt. And you have the sequence with the cows. He awakened, he fell asleep and dreamt a second time. Verb, dreamt a second time about the kernels of the wheat, right? Then it says he awoke, v'hinei chalom. Behold, it was a dream. Yeah, tell me something I don't know. He was dreaming, right? We got that. No. He had the sequence of the cows, awoke, fell asleep again, and then had the sequence of the kernels, and he awoke, and it was a dream. It was one dream, not 2 dreams. Okay, then it says he calls in his wise people, and he tells them his dream, and no one could interpret them for Pharaoh. No one could interpret them. What about the grammar here, boys and girls? He told them his dream singular, and no one could interpret them plural. That's because, and this is where the oral tradition tells us what they said, they saw it as 2 dreams with 2 messages. 2 separate messages, because it's 2 dreams. So Pharaoh says, listen, I don't know what it's about, I don't know what it predicts, but I know one thing, it's 1 dream. And if you guys all unanimously say it's 2 dreams, you're wrong. Okay. Now comes Joseph. What did Joseph say? The first words out of Joseph's mouth are, Pharaoh's dream is 1. End of the second sentence says the cows and the kernels are 7 years. It's 1 dream. He says the second time. And after he finishes his whole explanation, he says, and by the way, the repetition of the dream, I told you it's 1, and you saw 2. I'll explain that to you. It's only for emphasis, because Baruch was telling you that it's definitely going to happen. It's going to happen fast. He says 3 times it's 1 dream. If you're reading the text and you're paying attention, you're saying, why did he make such a big deal out of it being 1 dream? Who cares whether it's 1 dream or not? Why is that important? The reason it's important, of course, this is all divine inspiration. It's important because that's the key to how Pharaoh knows that he's right. and that he's superior to all of his other wise men. So this is, and then, but to be right isn't enough to make him viceroy of the whole kingdom. He's in charge of everything going on in the kingdom. Rakaki say Egdali Mecca, the throne of authority will be above you, but everything that happens you're going to be taken. Again, it's the idea of seeing a person who puts himself on the line for the responsibility for what happens. It's this exquisite emphasis of responsibility that is what characterizes Joseph. Okay. Now, let's go to another facet of the story. Joseph tells the brothers, you got to bring down Binyamin. So they go back to Canaan, to Jacob, and say, we have to bring Binyamin down to Egypt. We can't get more food. And Jacob says, I'm afraid. I don't know what will happen to him. His brother, Joseph, is gone, and I only have 2 from Rachel, and this is the other one from Rachel. You take him. I don't know what will happen. I don't want to send him. So Reuven says, send him with me. If I don't bring him back to you, then you could kill my 2 sons. So the oral tradition has a very bitter response for Jacob. Jacob said, my oldest son is crazy. I could kill his 2 sons. They're my grandchildren. That the compensation you're awarding me, the punishment I can inflict to hurt you, if you fail, that I should kill my own 2 grandsons? Where are you coming from? What do you have in mind? I'm not sending you my Binyamin with you. If he goes with you, he'll die. So he says no. Okay, then they run out of food. So Jacob says, please go and get us food. And then Judah speaks. What does Judah say? Yehuda. He says, I guarantee him. You can seek him at my hand. If I don't bring him back to you, I will have sinned against my father for all time. It's not you can punish me. It's not that you can take something away from me and then I'll be doing it in order to avoid that punishment. No, I'm on the line. My life is on the line. My honor is on the line. My spirituality is on the line. I'm guaranteeing it because I'm guaranteeing it. I'm taking responsibility for it. It's with him that he sends it. This theme of responsibility runs through the stories that of these parshios. Now, who led the war against the Greeks? It was the family of the high priest. Why is that? Why are they the ones? Well, what is a priest? A priest is someone who's the cement of the relationship between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Jewish people. That's his job. That's his concern. That's his responsibility, to make sure that the connection is secure. Here, the Greeks are opposing the practice of Judaism and the beliefs of Judaism, and those who are responsible for that relationship, those are the ones who start the rebellion. It's appropriate for them to start the rebellion because what the Greeks are doing contradicts their responsibility. It's an expression of that responsibility. Again, I'm not saying this is the whole story, but I think this is a very important part of the story. That now, the idea that the priest is responsible for the relationship between Kodesh Baruch Hu and the Jewish people is brought out by the episode of Aaron, the high priest, in the construction of the golden calf. The people come to Aaron and say, make us something that should be in place of Moses, that should be something which we can use to proceed. And it means to make a physical object that will be this thing. Well, you're not supposed to do that. I'm sure they're not supposed to do that. Why does Aaron do it? And in particular, how could it be that when he creates the golden calf, and there are people who participate in its construction and its inauguration, those who participate, who happen to be firstborn, lose their position as priests, and Aaron becomes the high priest. That's really tough. Those who just gave money, if they were firstborn and they up until that time were priests, lost it, and he who actually makes it, he becomes the high priest. Very difficult to understand. So Chazal fill in part of the explanation, and that is his reasoning. Well, they came to me and told me to make this statue, but they didn't come to me first. First they came to Hur, and when Hur said no, they killed him. So they mean business. They're not fooling around. So they're coming to me, and if I say no, they'll kill me also. All right, so they'll kill me. So what? But there is a rule that if the people kill a priest and a prophet, then there's no way back. What sealed the fate of the first temple was killing the prophet Zechariah, who was a Kohen. And when that happened, our sources tell us the first temple was sealed. Even doing tshuva would not have stopped it. The first temple had to be destroyed. So he says, I have two choices. I can do what they say, or I can not do what they say and get killed, which from the point of view of my soul and my place in the world to come would be much superior, but they will have committed a crime for which there's no way out. I'd rather sacrifice myself and my position to save them that greater crime. Now, let's ask, was this understanding, this reasoning, correct or incorrect? The answer was incorrect. It was wrong. Indeed, there's a pasuk in Dvarim where it says, Moshe Rabbeinu was talking, said, Hashem said to destroy him. Vayom Hashem lahashmido. And then Moses prayed for him and got him forgiveness to be able to continue to live. So Aaron's decision is wrong. It's definitely a mistake. But why did he make it? He made it because he couldn't envision the greater disaster for the relationship between God and the Jewish people, which would happen if he didn't make it. His focus was on what's going to happen between Hashem and the Jewish people. That's exactly the focus you want a priest to have. That's exactly what his responsibility is. So here you have a complex situation where his action was wrong, and in normal legal terms would have resulted in his death. When Moses prays for him, then because of the motivation for the action, his character is the ideal character to be a priest. Now this is my explanation. This part is my explanation of how he became the high priest. So that's what you see in the responsibility of the priest. And here you have the high priest and his family, the leaders of the whole priestly faction of the Jewish people, and it comes to a point where they say, we can't abide this anymore. And they undertake this military action, which in the end is successful, which means their decision was surely correct. Because Baruch Hu gave them that military victory. As we said last week, the military victory is also miraculous in the sense that it's like the boiling of the egg. It happens only because the Kodesh Baruch Hu wants it to happen. He's the one who provides the actual victory. So this theme of responsibility colors the whole stretch of the activities. And this, again, now you see, to go back to where we started, when you have something where you see superficially what happens, you don't know why it happens. When people do things, it's very hard to piece together their real motivation for doing something. And what we're being told here is just fulfilling the outer form, just performing the outer action isn't enough. It has to have a character in it, under it, behind it, which gives it its ultimate value. Not that the action alone doesn't have value, it does, but it has much more value when the character is behind it. And that's the idea of this particular character trait of responsibility, taking responsibility. In a way, taking responsibility, the message in taking responsibility is, this thing is more important than I am. That's why I'm dedicating myself to it, because it's bigger than I am. You know, you have a mitzvah of honoring your parents. Honoring your parents expresses itself in serving them, giving them physical service. So imagine, you're about to go out for the day, and your father says to you, please make me breakfast. That's a biblical commandment to make him breakfast. What does this express? Well, let's see. I was about to leave. I have a life, thank you. You know, I have things to do, and I have projects, and so on and so on. And my father's breakfast is more important than that. So I delay what I'm doing in order to give him breakfast. The statement is I'm acknowledging his importance. That's what honor does. So here, when you take responsibility for something, it's saying, whatever I have, whatever I am, this is important enough to deserve my application of responsibility. There are many reasons why people decide to leave a religious lifestyle. But there's one type of person, which is, again, there are many types. One type of person who says, look, I think I have talent, I think I have knowledge, I think I have abilities, I think I could accomplish something. What's worthy of my efforts? What's important enough that it's appropriate for me to dedicate the gifts that I have to that project? And that's the attitude here. And then what the person, when he does it, he says, listen, this is so important that dedicating myself to it is the appropriate thing to do. There are many times in history where you have people who do that out of the sense of responsibility. So I think this is part of what motivated the rebellion. And of course, once they sparked the rebellion, so many people joined it. I was listening to somebody the other day telling me, well, of course it was a miracle. It's 6 against millions. No, it wasn't 6 against millions. It wasn't 6 on our side. It wasn't millions on their side. It was a national rebellion. Okay, some Jews were fighting on the side of the Greeks. There are the Jews who became Hellenized. There was, to a certain extent, a civil war. But it was a guerrilla war, according to Maharal. It was perfectly naturalistic in appearance. You didn't see any open miracles. Okay, so that's the upshot of the Greeks opposing Shabbos, Mila, and the sanctification of the new moon. Tomorrow will be Q&A like it usually is.